First Person is produced in cooperation with the Far East Broadcasting Company, who rejoice in the stories of changed lives through the power of Jesus Christ. Learn more at febc.org.
As Joni told me in that note, God has great things in store for you as you walk with Him. It's not better circumstances necessarily. I hope it is, and we don't want bad circumstances, but ultimately, it's to mold us and shape us and to shine for Him in a brighter way wherever we are.
Coming up now in First Person, you'll meet the new president of Joni and Friends, Shawn Thornton. Welcome. I invite you to stay with us for the conversation. I'm Wayne Shepherd. It's amazing to hear the variety of personal stories we get to hear on First Person. Through the years, we've talked with hundreds of people, each with a little different circumstance that led them to faith and service to Jesus Christ. You can go back through our online archive and be encouraged as you listen. To listen and even download past programs, just subscribe to our podcast, which you'll find with any podcast app. Search for First Person with Wayne Shepherd. And we're also found on Facebook, facebook.com/firstpersoninterview, where we encourage your comments and reactions and even suggestions for upcoming guests. Of course, you can always listen on our website, which is firstpersoninterview.com, and you'll also find program notes there, firstpersoninterview.com. Well, let's meet our guest, who until recently served as a pastor in California, but now has been led to a new assignment. His name is Shawn Thornton.
My new assignment, Wayne, is that I am the president and chief ministry officer at Joni and Friends.
After 30-some years of pastoral ministry and other ministry,
Yep.
Now you find yourself as president of Joni and Friends, and we'll talk about that. This got to be kind of a new thing for you, in a way, isn't it?
It is. It's kingdom work. I'm still focused on the gospel. Still focused on helping local churches have a heart for disability ministry and welcome people. But it's different in the rhythm. My weekends are different now. I go to church and I'm a part of the church and I speak from time to time in churches. But it is a different rhythm, and it's been a blessing from the Lord.
Yeah.
It's really been a blessing.
Well, we want to know more about Joni and Friends, and we'll get to that in a few moments. But when we spoke a number of years ago, you had just written a book called All But Normal, Life on Victory Road. And give us a little, that was a memoir. Give us a little synopsis of that book, just to remind everyone.
Yeah.
And then I'll try to remember to put a link to that earlier interview in our program notes as well.
Okay, and I appreciate that interview back then when the book came out. It's almost been 10 years, not quite 10 years since you and I sat down and talked about that book, Wayne. And I grew up in a home where my mother had a traumatic brain injury at age 14. She'd been knocked unconscious in a car accident for 3 months, turned 15 in that coma. When she woke up back in 1962, there wasn't the physical therapy and all the different therapies you get today. She was sent home, and they basically told her to, her parents to have her crawl and walk that way again, which is not a great way after you've learned to walk once. That's a bad way to learn to walk without therapy. So she had to learn to walk, talk, and other things all over again. And that brought her then, as she got married to my dad at 18, had me at 19 while he was in Vietnam. He went off to Vietnam after he got married. It left her with emotional, physical. She never could drive. She could never really hold a job. Her fine motor skills were very slow, very stiff. So to sign her name took 10 minutes. So we'd beg her when we needed a permission slip sign, hurry, the bus is here, the bus is here. And her name was Beverly Thornton. We just say, sign Bev. We loved her dearly. And, but she was institutionalized a couple of times, taken out of the home when she had a breakdown. And back then, they didn't call it traumatic brain injury. Matter of fact, she was tested by every possible doctor, all psychologists and psychiatrists of the 1970s. And finally, my dad started seeing little articles pop up about a thing called traumatic brain injury. And now it's a big deal. We hear about it with the NFL. We hear it about soldiers who come home from Afghanistan and Iraq. There are support groups all over the country. Churches are more sensitive in their disability ministries to people affected by traumatic brain injury. So that shaped my childhood. It gave me a heart for ministry, for families who had kind of private pain that a lot of people didn't know was going on. That really pushed me into pastoral ministry. And quite frankly, it's kind of full circle. It's pretty emotional for me because my mom's inspiration outside of Jesus with her disabilities was Joni Eareckson Tada because she'd released her book and the movie. So this is full circle for me.
I wanted to mention that because I love how God plants those little seeds. I mean, you had no idea at the time that eventually you would become associated and even lead Joni's ministry. I mean, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, my mom would say on a regular basis, she'd have some her emotions would go really high and extreme with, yelling and screaming and throwing. And then she'd go low and depressed and not get out of bed. It was a traumatic brain injury left my mother just kind of short circuiting, if you could say it, all the time.
Yeah.
And she'd have a breakdown, either go low and, finally come out of her bedroom, or she'd have a breakdown throwing things at the kitchen table, screaming. And she would come down from that, whichever way. She would come out of whatever episode and say, if Jesus can help Joni Eareckson Tada, he can help me. And so she bought the little cards that came out at Christmas. She had the book when she was institutionalized when I was 14, one of the longest periods for several months. She was institutionalized in a mental home. She could only take 2 books with her. She took her Bible and the Joni story, the original Joni story that came out 50 years ago this year. And so this ministry meant a lot to her, even though she didn't know Joni personally. Joni became an inspiration for her, a reminder that through God's strength, no matter what your challenges are, he can get you through.
Now, you've known Joni for a number of years now. Do you remember the first time you told Joni that story of your mom?
I do, because the other thing about my story, Wayne, even with the book, is I didn't tell anybody my story. I didn't think it mattered because it was a tough childhood. But my mom also loved Jesus in the midst of that. My dad came home from Vietnam, went to the factory, blue collar, wise, godly man, but he often, trying to deal with my mom, added fuel to the fire. He didn't know how to help her. So often it made more chaos and more conflict. And so I didn't tell my story at all. But when I've been a pastor for 15 years, when I came to California 18 years ago to pastor a church, one exit from Joni and Friends. I didn't know Joni and Friends was in the community. I end up in this big empty office at a large church here in Southern California, Westlake Village, called Calvary Community Church. I go in the office. The truck hasn't come with our stuff, so I don't have my books. I don't have my desk stuff. It's just a big empty office with some furniture and some empty shelves. But on the center of the desk was a little card. It just said on the front, Reverend Shawn Thornton. I open the little card, and it's a note that says, while we don't attend Calvary Community Church has been an important voice for Christ and the gospel in our community. And we've been praying for a pastor. The church had gone through a pastor with moral failure and was really broken. We've been praying for the church to return to its heart. And then it said, so we're praying for you and believe you're God's man for this moment. And it was signed Joni Eareckson Tada and Ken Tada. Oh. And while I was reading that note alone my first day, September 15th, 2008, in that office, the tears started flowing because I thought of my mom. And she'd been with the Lord at that point 18 years. And so I just started crying. Well, actually, she'd been with the Lord 8 years, excuse me. And I started to cry, and the teardrops just hit that note. Oh. And then maybe 2 months later, somebody said, you need to go meet Joni. So I came over here, one exit away. I mean, it's 3 minutes from that church's parking lot to the Joni and Friends parking lot. I came and I told Joni the story, and she said, well, do you use that in your ministry? I said, no, I don't tell any stories from my childhood. If I tell them, they're just about Sunday school or something. I don't talk about my home and my mom because that doesn't matter. And she said, would you tell that story to some of our donors and friends that gather annually? And I said, well, okay, but I don't want it recorded. I don't want anybody to share it because I was afraid to embarrass my dad, my brother. My mom's mom was still alive. I had aunts and uncles who didn't know the full story. And I shared it that day. And in the audience was Max Lucado. He was the other speaker that weekend. And Max told me, as soon as I came down the platform, he said, you got to tell your story. Either I write it in my book or you write a book. And I said, which would you do? He said, you need to write a book. And so then he encouraged me and Joni encouraged me. Then the book came out. And I started telling the story. And I had people in the ministries where I'd served before mad at me because I never told the stories of my childhood. But I thought it didn't matter. But now I know our stories do matter to God.
Sure. Yeah.
They're part of who we are.
We talk a lot on this program about calling. And sometimes it takes a while. And sometimes it just comes in a flash. For you, I mean, it's a little mixture of both, I guess, but really that's a pretty clear calling that you need to write this book, right?
Oh, it was pretty clear. I was still nervous, and I had to, honestly, it took me about 5 years to write it. That was in 2011 was when I shared it with Joni's supporters, and many of them I've been friends with since that day, and now I lead, and they're still supporters and prayer warriors and volunteers with us, and some are staff now with us. But it was a calling. It was cathartic. God worked in my heart. But my grandmother, my mom's mom, had to go with the Lord, be with the Lord before I could actually release it, because it was too hard for me. She had lived through that accident. She lived through my mom's challenges. She lived through my mom being institutionalized. It was hard for my maternal grandmother. She was of a generation and of a personality where she would have thought that would maybe be embarrassing, or why would you tell that publicly? If she knew now, if my grandmother could know how many people it's blessed and how many people found hope in Jesus because of it, she would have been happy, because she loved the Lord too. But it would have been hard for her to face some of those stories that we kept from my grandmother and our relatives in our church, that we kept at home. And we didn't actually make agreements between my dad, my brother, my mom, and me when things would go down negatively. Terrible things would happen in our home. We just all kind of knew we would never talk about it. So I told things in that book we'd never spoken of as a family since the incidents happened.
Well, let's turn Joni's note around for a moment. And I'm sure you were the recipient, but I'm sure you many times have been the sender of a note like that, or some form of encouragement. So let's encourage people listening right now. Let's pick up that challenge, and let's do that in people's lives, huh?
Yeah, well, I would say this, that one thing I've learned from Joni's example is she's pretty transparent without being, today there's this, in the younger generation, even in the church, is this idea of authenticity, but it's almost to the point where you're vomiting everything up on people, right? and that's just kind of rude, and they can't handle it. But there's something, when you listen to Joni on the radio, or you just talk with her, and she's talking to another, if I'm with her with a new, someone she's meeting who's a quadriplegic for the first time, she'll talk catheters, she'll talk, she does it with grace and beauty, but she's not afraid to talk about the realities.
Sure.
And I think one of the things I would say to people that Joni's encouraged me, even through that original note, is God uses everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, for our good. And sometimes we think our good means, in Romans 8, everything works together for good. We make that up, kind of a lucky rabbit's foot verse that means all my circumstances are going to be beautiful. It doesn't mean that. It means he's going to mold me and shape me, as verse 29 says, and conform me to the image of his son. And so I've just encouraged those who have a childhood, and sometimes I've had people who have an alcoholic parent, a parent with mental health, parent with a disability, parent with whatever their issues were. People will come up to me, grown adults will say, boy, reading your book, hearing you talk has really helped me think about my story and what can I learn from it, even if it was harsh and even if there was inappropriate behavior. And how do I see what God's done? Because I want to name the book Not All But Normal. I wanted to name it originally How God Shapes a Pastor's Heart, because I always looked at it as how God shaped my heart to serve people. But at the same time, the publisher Tyndale was smart enough to say, that's a pretty narrow audience who's going to read how it's going to be the mothers of pastors and pastors, it's all who's going to read your book. But we all have circumstances. Maybe it's a battle with cancer. Maybe it's the homegoing of a spouse. It's the homegoing of a child, a miscarriage, where we go through life. And to know that our God meets us in those moments. As a 14-year-old, the night my mom was taken out of that house, I don't know if I've ever had as intimate and personal an experience with the Lord. I didn't see a 50-foot Jesus at the end of my bed. I didn't see a bright light. I didn't hear a voice, but I can tell you as a 14-year-old who knew Jesus and been raised in a good church and my parents loved Jesus, Jesus met me in that deepest place. And I would hope people listening to us, Wayne, would know, and too, through life, the Lord will meet you in those moments when you just sit down, get in his word, let him speak to you, let his spirit whisper to you. And I would say to those who are listening, as Joni told me in that note, God has great things in store for you as you walk with him. It's not better circumstances necessarily. I hope it is. And we don't want bad circumstances, but ultimately it's to mold us and shape us and to shine for him in a brighter way wherever we are.
And we'll continue to get to know Shawn Thornton, the new president of Joni and Friends, coming up on First Person.
As we take a brief pause here on First Person, let me bring your attention to a video celebrating the 80th anniversary of the Far East Broadcasting Company. I'm Ed Cannon of FEBC, and in the wake of World War II, 3 Christians reimagined the Great Commission. The world was broken, nations were rebuilding, yet these men were full of hope. Their vision led to the founding of the Far East Broadcasting Company, and while technology has changed, the message was never changed. To view the 80th anniversary video, please join us online at febc.org.
My guest is Shawn Thornton. Shawn is now president of Joni and Friends after a long season of being a pastor and a teacher and all-around good guy encourager, I would say. And you mentioned your book earlier, All But Normal, which I'm glad to say has been republished, and we'll put a link in our program notes so people can find and read that story. It's a powerful story, and I really encourage our listeners to read it, and I'm so thankful we got a chance to talk about it when the book first came out, Shawn. Okay, now you've had how long at this helm of Joni and Friends?
1 year and 1 week.
Oh, you were so experienced now, but you kind of eased your way into it because you were a board member before you became president.
Exactly. Again, I was one exit away. About, 30 to 50 staff of Joni and Friends attended the church I attended. About 16 years ago now, the then president of Joni and Friends, Doug Mazza, called me one day. He was a part of the congregation. He said, "Can we help you rebirth your disability ministry?" And Joni and Friends partnered with us, and we rebirthed our disability ministry. And now Calvary serves 100 to 150 families a week living with disability. They're right now on a building program to expand the space. We try to have kids in the services and in their age appropriate, but some kids need a little more special attention, and that helps develop them and disciple them and let them hear the gospel in their own setting. So that ministry is flourishing. And so now to be in this seat and have experienced it in a church and see how disability ministry, when you develop a heart for that, it reaches all kinds of people, because disability, special needs, is no respecter of race, ethnicity, socioeconomics. Some of the wealthiest people will have a child who's born with autism. Some of the poorest people will have a child who's born with autism. It's an area where the church, if you're big, small, urban, suburban, rural, in the U.S. or anywhere in the world, disability is when you embrace folks living with disability and their families, it develops the heart of the church to be compassionate toward other marginalized people. We found it expanded our heart for the poor. It expanded our heart for those who maybe are marginalized by their race or their ethnicity, their accent, whatever it is. And so for me to be in this space now, and the mission of Joni and Friends is to glorify God as we communicate the gospel and mobilize the global church to evangelize, disciple, and serve those living with disability. So it's all about global churches in local settings all around the world being places that can welcome and embrace people with disabilities. So it's just right. It just goes hand in hand with what my life has been.
It just kind of oozes out of you, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Well, when you stop and think about it, I mean, is there a church in the world that isn't touched in some way or another by a person with disabilities, whether it's in the congregation or a family member of the congregation? I mean, everyone has got this need.
Yeah, but only 10% of churches in America are able to fully embrace them. In other words, you've got some churches that are old enough now, there's not even access into the building without going up steps. A wheelchair has to be carried, or an autistic child and their family have to sit in the lobby, which I understand in some cases. But even if a church just says, you're going to find someone who has a heart for that family. And even if they sit with the family in the lobby, to sit with them, be a lobby buddy with the family, it could change the world for that family. I wish I could. I don't even know the number of families in the last 15 years as a pastor that came up to me and hugged me because for the first time in their 14-year-old child's life, who's blind, in a wheelchair, nonverbal, for the first time in 14 years, the parents sat together in a worship service. And it's powerful, Wayne. In America still, people living with disability are one of the highest unreached people groups because you just hear the stories. And what breaks my heart the most is when in our area, would hear another church, a family would come to us. I remember one family came to us from another church, a good church, good pastor. And the husband had been an elder in that church. They'd been in that church 20 years, but they had a child with disability. And they finally told the family, you need to go to Calvary Community Church because they can handle your family. We can't. Now, I understand we were equipped and we developed facilities that were able to deal with disability. But there's got to be in our churches a sense of openness like Christ had to the hurting, the marginalized, and the disabled.
Mm-hmm.
And it can revolutionize the church.
Yeah. Take me overseas, because this isn't just a U.S. North American thing, Joni and Friends.
No.
Tell me an exciting story. What's going on overseas? We got a couple minutes left here.
Well, just in a few weeks, I'm going to be in Bangkok, Thailand, and I'm going. They tell me people tell me where to go. I'm going to go 5 hours out of there, and we're going to be on a Wheels for the World project. So we take wheelchairs that are used here in the U.S. Like my father-in-law's in a wheelchair, and we've got one. We just had to replace it because it was broken. The wheel was broken. The padding on the arms was all ripped. And I'm going to bring it to Joni and Friends. It will go to one of 13 prisons we partner with in the United States that beat up old wheelchair. It will be restored. About 200 to 250 will be put on a piece of cargo that, a container that will go on a ship. And those restored chairs will be put on a ship and sent to places like Ghana or Thailand. So in the case of where I'm going, we'll be going to a very remote village. We have a pastor in a local church who are going to be with us and distribute wheelchairs that have been restored in the United States. And they will be given, but we take physical therapists from churches around the country with us who will help fit the chair to the child or to the adult. And they will be given a Bible. We'll share the gospel with the family, and they'll be introduced to a church in their village that's ready to embrace them fully into the life of the church. And it's all, again, about equipping local churches around the world. That wheelchair is a tool to open those doors.
Sure.
And so I just want to emphasize that chair in some parts of the world will break through curses and myths and superstitions where someone's kept in a back room because she was born unable to walk, whatever the disability, and she was thought of as demon-possessed or cursed, and you can't touch her, get near her, because you'll get the same thing she has. And so this woman may be kept in a back room. She gets a wheelchair. It liberates the family. It can liberate a village from centuries of superstitions, and the gospel shines brightly in those dark places.
Fabulous.
And it's all through the local church.
Yeah, fabulous. It's been a while since I've spoken with Joni. Is she doing okay these days?
Yeah, she is. Matter of fact, I don't say this just because I work for her. She might hear this. Joni is the hardest working person in ministry I've ever worked with. She has been in the chair 58 years, a quadriplegic. She is the oldest active quadriplegic in the United States. She's the oldest woman quadriplegic in the United States. And yet she's still going strong.
Yeah.
And now any little cold can set her back for a few weeks. And she's very vulnerable health-wise, but God has been good, and she loves Jesus and keeps bringing glory to Christ.
Shawn, the last thing is, I just get the sense that you're just really enjoying this assignment. You love being a pastor.
I am.
But you got a big smile on your face. You enjoy this work, huh?
I can't wait to see more and more churches embrace more and more people with disability in the U.S. and around the world, because I think it will enlarge the heart of the global church for the people that Jesus died for and loves, and see them come to Jesus and then be embraced by his bride, the church.
Yes. To learn more about the ministry of Joni and Friends, please visit firstpersoninterview.com, where you'll find a link to the ministry and more information about today's guest, Shawn Thornton. To listen again, to share this program, visit firstpersoninterview.com. We can also be found at facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. And a special thank you to the Far East Broadcasting Company for supporting First Person. FEBC is a ministry I love to serve, and I hope you'll take some time to learn more about it at febc.org. At the website, you can listen to our daily radio show, FEBC Today, or our podcast, Until All Have Heard, along with other features and prayer requests. All this and more is found at febc.org. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Join us next time for First Person.